to enable employees to communicate more effectively. Attackers have recognized this and begun leveraging these platforms for nefarious purposes. This presentation will discuss how attackers are using collaboration platforms through various stages of their malware attacks and what organizations can do to defend against these attacks. Edmund is a threat researcher with Cisco Talos. He spent several years protecting environments across a number of different industries, including nuclear, energy, financial services, etc. He currently spends his days hunting malware and analyzing various threats as they emerge and continue to evolve. In his time with Talos, he's researched ransomware and other threats being distributed using various attack vectors. He's also worked to expose large-scale malware campaigns and raise awareness of security threats observed through the threat landscape. So like I mentioned briefly at the opening remarks, a lot of that, this ties into that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Edmund. Again, thank you for doing this for us. I know you're down in Texas, different time zone and all that stuff, and you're doing this virtually. So at the end, make sure you send me your mailing address. We have a gift for you. Over to you.
Will do. How's the audio?
Oh, we can hear you good.
Good? Okay, awesome. Well, hey, thanks for having me. Just a disclaimer, my internet actually dropped about 3 to 5 minutes ago, so I'm coming in over cellular. So let's see how this goes. We'll do it live. Thanks for having me. My name is Edmund. I wanted to talk a little bit today about collaboration platforms. As everyone's aware at this point, the pandemic caused a significant number of changes across a lot of enterprise workflows. A lot of organizations that at one time were relying on employees to communicate by being in the same room or in the same physical building have had to adapt to changes in work from home situations that have required remote employee collaboration to become a more significant part of a lot of enterprise workflows. So a lot of organizations have turned to collaboration platforms like Discord and Slack to facilitate more efficient, more effective communication between employees that may be located in different physical locations. So as these platforms have achieved significant increases in popularity, adversaries have also recognized several different opportunities to leverage these same platforms across their attacks. So I wanted to kind of talk about those, what we're seeing, how these platforms are being abused, and I want to focus on 3 specific phases, for lack of a better term, of a typical malware infection or a typical malware attack. I want to talk about how they're leveraging these platforms across the initial malware delivery phase, so how the initial malicious content is being delivered to victims. I also want to talk about how they're leveraging platforms like Discord and Slack during the infection process. Typically, this involves the retrieval of additional malicious components, right? A lot of the malware infections that we're seeing are no longer single-stage infections. In a lot of cases, they rely on multiple disparate stages of execution. A lot of times that involves the retrieval of additional payloads, of additional modules, of additional functionality that then is leveraged later on. And then finally, I want to talk about what we're seeing from a command and control and post-compromise perspective. So what happens once the malware is on the system? How are we seeing them leveraging these same platforms at that stage as well? So just to start out and give you a little bit of background on me, my name is Edmund. So I'm a security researcher with Cisco Talos. I've been on the Talos team for a little over 5 years now. Prior to that, I spent a decade in security operations, so I've held pretty much every role you can hold on a security operations team, analyst, engineer, architect, all the way up to SOC team lead. I love malware. That's what I do. Since joining the Talos team, my focus has been primarily on financially motivated cybercrime, so e-crime or crimeware, depending on who you're talking to. And I also do embedded systems and IoT-related research as well. So let's dive right in. Let's talk about the 2 major collaboration platforms that we're seeing abused in a lot of these attacks. So you've got Discord and Slack. So just to kind of compare and contrast the 2 platforms a little bit, Discord was initially very popular in the gaming community. So if you think about back in the day, you used to play World of Warcraft, and when you were trying to coordinate your raids, you would hop on Ventrilo and you would voice chat with other members of your guild or whatever. Very similar concept, but a lot of the gaming community has moved from platforms like TeamSpeak and Discord, or TeamSpeak and Ventrilo over to Discord. It allows instant messaging, audio and video calls. It has APIs exposed for automating interactions with the platform, so you can program bots, various automations that take advantage of this API to interact with the Discord platform. Last I checked, they specified that they are currently seeing about 140 million monthly users, so a pretty significant footprint as far as individuals and whatnot that are taking advantage of Discord. So as the pandemic has kind of continued, we've seen Discord start to be used for things other than just gaming. If you think about a lot of even the information security conferences that have taken place over the last 12 to 18 months, many of them are using Discord as the primary mechanism or the primary platform to facilitate the conference. You think about DEF CON and CactusCon, some of these other conferences, the primary way that you attend the conference is using a platform like Discord. So likewise, we have Slack. Everyone's probably familiar with Slack. If you're not, it offers similar functionality. You can chat, you can make audio and video calls. This platform is more typically catering towards enterprise use or collaboration between employees inside of a workplace. Instead of calling their instances servers like Discord does, they tend to refer to them as workspaces. Like Discord, they also have an API that can be used for similar purposes to what I previously described. And according to Slack, they have about 10 million daily users. So as these numbers have increased throughout the pandemic, adversaries have recognized that they're a pretty attractive platform for use across different malware attacks. And we've seen this over the past 12 to 18 months. Discord and Slack are now being used for various purposes during the distribution of a variety of different malware families. So you've got stealers like Agent Tesla and LokiBot. You've got commercial and non-commercial rats. You've got keyloggers. There's a variety of different threats that are being targeted towards victim organizations. And one of the things that we found interesting when doing this research was the adversaries' reliance on Discord and Slack for various purposes. And that's kind of what I wanted to drill into today. So I want to start out by talking about the initial stage of most infection processes, the malware delivery stage, right? This is how the initial malicious contents are being delivered to a potential victim. So when you think about this could be emails with hyperlinks, this could be malicious Office documents, or a variety of other communication mechanisms. This could be chats within the platform where someone is posing as one of the victim's contacts and says, here, download this file and execute it to do X, Y, Z, whether that's generating cheat codes for games, or whether that's an invoice or a receipt or a purchase order, or any of the other common lures that we typically see. So in order to understand how these platforms are being leveraged at this stage of the typical attack process, you need to understand how the content delivery mechanisms within these platforms work. So if you've ever used Discord, you're probably familiar. You join servers. Those servers can have a bunch of different rooms or channels, if you will, and you can chat with people. You can start audio, video, conferencing functionality within the platform. And one of the things that you can do is you can upload files, right? You can attach images, you can attach GIFs, you can post memes, you can attach pretty much any file that you would like. What a lot of people don't recognize is that when you do this, the file that you upload even to that private channel or that private server that you're a member of, that file is available to anyone on the internet regardless of if they even have Discord installed or have ever authenticated to Discord if you know the URL. And you can see an example of that here, right? I had a dumpster fire animated GIF that I uploaded to a test channel that I created. And you can see that if you look at the metadata associated with that image within Discord, you can obtain the hard-coded URL that points to the same file. So this holds true for any sort of attachments that you upload into Discord. And so you can see how this is ripe for abuse from an attacker standpoint, right? It doesn't cost any money to set up your own Discord server. You can do it for free, and then you can begin to attach files, keeping track of the URLs that point to those individual files. And in a lot of cases, adversaries are doing that and then leveraging the the Discord content delivery network to facilitate the delivery process to a victim. When you think about it, it makes a lot of sense from an adversarial perspective, right? They don't have to pay for hosting costs. They don't have to own a bunch of content management systems on the internet and use those for distribution. And they can leverage a legitimate platform that a lot of organizations have come to use for legitimate purposes, meaning that in a lot of cases, this URL, this domain, this platform may not be filtered at an ingress-egress point within a victim organization's environment. So we're seeing a lot of that sort of activity from an adversarial perspective. And not to just pick on Discord, Slack supports a very similar type of functionality. In this particular case, one of the main differences is that instead of the file being accessible by default, you actually generate a public link for the specific file that you want to share or put in an email, or however adversaries feel like they can best deliver that to potential victims. And then once you've done that, again, you can access the file that was uploaded into Slack from anywhere in the world, regardless of whether you have the app installed or have a Slack account or anything like that. So how are we seeing this abused? Well, if you look at some of the most common malware sample repositories, in this case I just took a quick search of VirusTotal, and you can search based on what URLs or what domains a specific file may be reaching out to. In this case, the content delivery network for Discord is cdn.discordapp.com. Just doing a quick search in VT, back in April when we initially published this particular research block, there was about 17,500 samples. I just did a quick search today, and that number is up to 28,000. So clearly there's some volumetric increases that we've seen recently, and I don't expect that to stop anytime soon. Adversaries recognize that a lot of organizations trust these platforms, and as such, by leveraging them, they can take advantage of the TLS encryption of communications with these platforms. Any sort of malicious downloads look just like any other communications with Discord where you're interacting with a file. So it's easier to blend in. They can circumvent network-based analysis of TCP connections while they're facilitating that delivery process. And they don't have to do anything as far as a cost goes in terms of hosting these files. So the way we're typically seeing these implemented is in the form of malicious fan campaigns. So malicious email campaigns that contain links to files stored on the Discord CD. And you can kind of see on the graph, this kind of shows the volumetric increase we've seen. It started right around the April 2020 timeframe, which coincidentally is when a lot of organizations began to kind of leverage these platforms for more purposes within their enterprise workflows. So most of the time when we see these used, you'll see an email that is sent to a potential victim. That email will contain a link to a file stored on the Discord or Slack content delivery network. In most cases, we've seen them use compressed archive formats. So what they'll do is they'll take their malware payload, they'll compress it using any number of different compression algorithms, and then they'll link to that. And again, this just provides another obfuscation mechanism because if you're inspecting the contents of the network communications, you may see a gzip blob and not be able to obtain any additional information about what's stored in the compressed archive. So here's just an example of an email that I thought was interesting. So this email is attempting to get the victim to open a file that they say is attached. You can kind of see there's what looks to be a PDF attached to the email. What was interesting about this is when you look at the actual source code, there's no PDF attached to the email. What they had actually done was they had hyperlinked to a file stored on the Discord CD, and in this case it was an ISO archive, and the PDF graphic that you saw in the email was simply them using an image source of a JPEG. So they made it appear as if there was a PDF, which are pretty common in most enterprises, and they were basically on the back end linking to a file stored in the Discord content delivery network to facilitate the delivery of the initial payload in this case. So that's kind of what we've seen from a delivery standpoint. We're seeing attackers host their contents on this Discord or Slack CDN, and then leveraging something like either chat within the platform or email with a hyperlink that facilitates the delivery of the initial stage of the infection. Once that's happened in a lot of cases, you enter kind of a component retrieval stage, and this is where the malware that's initially executing on the system may need to go out and retrieve additional components to facilitate different functionality that the malware wants to take advantage of. So you might see modules being downloaded to perform a variety of functions, or they may simply have broken their infection across multiple stages to try to add a layer of obfuscation and make analysis more difficult. So a good example of this is with the second stage payload retrieval. So once the initial malicious content is being executed on an endpoint or on a system, in a lot of cases what we're seeing is that second and third stage payloads are being retrieved using a very similar mechanism to what I described before. They're basically hosting their stage 2 PE32 executable in these content delivery networks, and then when the initial stages of an infection kicks off, when some macros execute or when a script is invoked in PowerShell, that is responsible for going out again to the Discord or Slack CDN and pulling down subsequent stage payloads that they can use to increase their sphere of control over the endpoint that they're operating on. So in this particular case, on the previous slide, you can see there's a PCAP screenshot that shows the HTTP stream associated with the retrieval of a second stage component. In this case, it was associated with Rimcos, which is a commercial rat that we see pretty commonly across the threat landscape. There are a variety of different threat actors that are trying to leverage Rimcos to operate against organizations, to operate against individuals. In this particular case, persistence, or the ability to re-execute the malware anytime the system's rebooted, was performed using registry run keys. Again, one of the most common ways we see persistence achieved during the infection process. They created a registry entry under the default run key location within the Windows registry that pointed to a Windows shortcut file. And when you look at that Windows shortcut file, that's what points to the actual Rimcos payload itself. In this particular case, that secondary component that was retrieved was basically an XOR blob. They would reverse the XOR process and then inject that into a remote process on the infected system. But that's kind of what this looked like. The interesting component here being, the use of that Slack or Discord CDN for the retrieval of that component. Here's another example. In this case, it was a malicious Word document. You can see from the title, the file name of the Word document, that this was Turkish, and they were basically making this document appear as if it would be associated with Discord Nitro codes, which is kind of a paid tier of Discord that allows you some additional functionality on the platform. So in this case, the Office document, they didn't put a lot of effort into putting a decoy image or a prompt for the user to disable the security mechanisms in Word. They simply left the document blank. But inside of the document were malicious Office macros. And you can see an example of one of these macros here. You can see it's been lightly obfuscated, but it's responsible for spawning WScript on a Windows endpoint and then doing bad things. When you deobfuscate the contents of this macro, you can see very clearly they call Windows Command Processor, they invoke PowerShell, and then they use PowerShell to facilitate the download of the second stage payload in this case, which was Async Rap. Again, another rat that we see pretty commonly across the commodity malware landscape. But just kind of shows how prolific these sorts of attacks are. We're seeing a significant increase in volume of attacks that are leveraging these platforms, right? They realize that they can circumvent defenses. They realize that by leveraging them, they can automatically take advantage of security protections that are provided by those platforms, right? TLS encryption. They can evade a lot of the conventional network-based protections that many organizations may rely on. So here's an example of that async Rap payload retrieval. You can see the GET request to the Discord CDN in this case for the actual binary payload, and you can see the MZ file header towards the bottom of that screenshot. That's the actual async Rap payload. It's executed on the system, and the system is infected with async Rap. So here's another example of a PDF. In this case, it was beakmill.pdf. You open the PDF, and there's a pretty simple message. The PDF obviously loves you, but on the back end, what it's trying to do is go out to the Discord CDN to pull down a second stage malware payload. And if you just take a look at even the strings associated with this PDF, you can see exactly what it's trying to do. It's trying to use JavaScript to go out and retrieve a PE32 that will then be executed and kick off the actual final malware infection itself. So we're seeing a ton of abuse of these. We're even seeing IoT botnets leveraging these CDNs for the purposes of retrieving additional components that are used once the initial infection process has taken place. This is an example of the command string associated with a variant of the QBot IoT botnet, where you can see that they're retrieving additional content from the Discord CDN during the infection process as well. So this is something that's being used very widely. The screenshots showing the VirusTotal query that I ran are a very, very good starting point if you're interested in getting some more information or analyzing or digging into some of these threats and seeing how they work. You can find no shortage of examples of these sorts of techniques being used. Right, this isn't a theoretical, this could be done. This is what we're seeing across the threat landscape pretty heavily. So once the infection process is complete, you typically will see some sort of a command and control channel established, or you'll see some sort of data exfiltration take place, or some other variety of post-compromise activities, reconnaissance, lateral movement, things like that. So how are adversaries taking advantage of collaboration platforms at this stage of the infection process? Well, so I mentioned at the very, very beginning of this presentation that both of the platforms that I've been focusing on, Slack and Discord, they allow automation to be configured. You can set up bots that do various things. You can set up automated scripts that interface or interact with these platforms for a variety of purposes, and they typically will implement this functionality in the form of what are called webhooks. And this is basically a publicly available API that you can use in your bot or you can use in your script to communicate back with your Discord server. So you can use this for sending updates or any number of different purposes. Well, threat actors are leveraging it for a variety of purposes as well. So you can see the URL here. You've got discord.com, API webhooks, and then a webhook ID. And this is typically an alphanumeric string that you can see. But at the same time, whereas traditional command and control in a lot of cases will look pretty obvious, if you're looking at network traffic, from your systems, your monitoring systems, your defensive systems in an organization, this looks a lot like normal Discord communications. And in many organizations, Discord.com, right, is not going to be blocked at the edge. So this is a very attractive way that adversaries can facilitate command and control. They can begin to operate further inside of victim environments without drawing a lot of attention to themselves. They have inherent encryption of the communications because, again, it's TLS, and they can blend in with the legitimate communications that may be seen. So this is an example of what a Discord webhook looks like. It's pretty straightforward. And it's pretty robust from a command and control perspective. Slack supports a similar type of format, and this is an example of what their webhook URL typically looks like and what the contents of a typical webhook may look like from Slack's perspective. So just to kind of give you some examples of what this looks like in practice. So this is an example of an initial beaconing that is taking place following a successful infection. So typically when you see a bot infect a system, one of the first things it'll do is it'll gather information about the system and then it'll report the successful infection status back to the threat actor. And they'll typically track metrics. They may have admin panels set up that provide an interface to manage the different bots under their control. But that C2 channel typically starts with some sort of a beaconing and registration process. So the infected system will register itself with C2. It'll say, hey, you infected me, and I'm now available for you to do whatever to. And this is an example of that. You can see the contents of the webhook are URL encoded, but you can see the decoded format there on the right side of the slide. In this particular case, it was that initial beaconing. They were basically receiving alerts via Discord when new systems were infected that gave them the name of the system as well as the URL to use to perform additional command and control. In this case, they were using the Portmap.io service. And just as an aside, Portmap is becoming a much more popular way for adversaries to obfuscate their C2 infrastructure. And so there's various services that operate very similarly. Ngrok is one, but Portmap is one that we've seen used in a variety of different threats. So the way that this works, as the attacker's command and control server will establish an open VPN connection to the portmap.io service. They'll also make sure that their malware is set up to establish a connection to the portmap.io domain as well. So you've got the C2 server connected to Portmap, you've got the infected victim connected to Portmap. So anytime the victim system attempts to communicate with the attacker server, they'll communicate with the portmap.io service, which provides that translation and routes the traffic back to the attacker's C2 server. And then likewise, any sort of interaction with infected systems takes place following the same type of data flow. And so what this does is this allows an adversary to stand up command and control infrastructure, but from a victim perspective, if you've got a system that's infected on your network and you're looking at the C2, it looks like all of the C2 is pointed towards Portmap, and you don't actually get any visibility into the back-end infrastructure that's being used to maintain the botnet or administer the C2 channel. So a couple of other interesting examples. This was a script that was written during the infection process of a piece of Windows malware. And so what they were doing in this case is they dropped a secondary payload that was called Discord send webhook. And this was just a persistent process that they would kick off that would run in the background on the infected system. And so what they would do is they would basically run this batch file. This file would be responsible for executing a lot of reconnaissance commands using the Windows Management Instrumentation Framework, the WMI interface within Windows, to collect a ton of information about the system. They would write the results of those WMI queries to text files, and then they would send the contents of those text files inside of Discord webhooks. So it's a pretty unique way to implement a command and control mechanism using nothing but Discord webhooks. And you can kind of see what this looks like on the wire within, in this case, Burp. So you can see that one of the initial messages that's sent is currently writing the info, currently collecting, wait a few minutes and you'll start to receive information about the infected system. So once that WMI has been kicked off, the reconnaissance information has been collected, that information is then sent line by line by reading the contents of those text files that were written and sending it in the form of Discord webhooks back to the adversary. You can see creation class name equals Win32 operating systems. That's basically just the command output of the execution of those WMI commands. Execute WMI, write it out to a text file, read the text file line by line, and transmit it back to the adversary's Discord server. So just another example of, in this case, it was LeakGap, which is a pay-to-decrypt ransomware variant that was also leveraging the Discord webhook API for the purposes of command and control. You can see, again, one of the initial parts of the C2 establishment process is that initial beaconing and registration process where they send information about the infected system back to the adversary. In this case, it is sent back to the adversary's Discord server where they can log in and begin to administer the infections that they've obtained. So in this case, I mentioned it was ransomware. Once the encryption process on the victim's system starts and the data and files begin to be encrypted, that status is then periodically sent to the attacker's Discord server so that they can keep track of their different systems, they can keep track of which systems have been successfully encrypted, and they can begin to perform some of the post-compromise ransomware operations, the extortion and processing of any sort of ransom payments and things of that nature. So in this particular case, once the encryption process is over, this is just an example of one of the ransom notes that's displayed for this particular variant of pay-to-decrypt. It's fairly straightforward. One of the interesting things is that they gave a timer. They said if you don't pay by a certain time, you're going to lose access to all your files. In a lot of cases, we may see them up the ransom demand if that time frame hasn't been met. Pretty much anything adversaries can do to maximize the likelihood they can convince a victim to pay out. And so finally, I want to talk about token and cookie stealing. So in both of these platforms, access tokens are stored on systems. So one of the things that we've seen adversaries focus on is ways to steal tokens from legitimate Discord or Slack users. And there's a variety of reasons they might want these tokens, it allows them to impersonate the user, access all of the Discord servers and all of the Slack workspaces that the user is an authorized part of, and it allows them to pose as that user. So this may maximize the number of potential victims that they can convince to open malicious files, download malicious content, things like that. If you get a message from somebody that you know and trust, you may be more likely to open it and kick off the initial infection process. One of the things that we noticed when we were doing this analysis was that at the time that we performed this research, there was no client verification performed. So if you had this access token from either Slack or Discord, or if you had the cookie, you could impersonate users, and you can use that for a variety of different nefarious purposes. So one of the things that we've noticed is that a lot of the token stealing applications often pose as game sheets or cracks or key gens. Takes me back a little ways, but you can see an example of this with Minecraft Gin, which was posing as being a crack associated with the Minecraft game that's pretty popular among kids nowadays. So here's the main function of Minecraft Gin, where they define the webhook that they're going to use to transmit exfiltrated information back to the threat actor. You can see they include a lot of different information that they're able to obtain, as well as the token. Here's an example of them doing that data gathering. So once they're executing on a system, they then execute this code that pulls a lot of information about the victim so that it can be transmitted back to the adversary, and you can kind of see them sending the token in this case. Another example is with a Growtopia themed stealer. This stealer was posing as being a crack associated with, or a gin associated with Growtopia, where the entire purpose of the application was stealing the Discord token, as well as additional information about the system that is then useful to adversaries. They can maintain anonymity, they can pose as victims, and they can try to leverage that access to further compromise individuals and organizations that way. So stealing Slack cookies is a little more complicated, but not by much, and a lot of what we've seen is targeting the browser cookie, the D cookie. Client cookies are stored in a SQLite database, so if you've got code execution on a system because that initial delivery stage has worked, and you've got code execution because they opened a file, they executed some macros or something of that nature, it's pretty trivial to be able to pull these tokens, and then adversaries can leverage those for additional purposes. So if you're interested in that, there's a tool out there called Slack Pirate. This is a Slack enumeration and extraction tool that you can use to test that process out and kind of see how easy it is for an adversary to take advantage of that functionality to steal tokens. And you can imagine what an adversary can do if they're able to obtain a Slack token for a user in your organization's workspace. They can then leverage that access to perform additional social engineering and that sort of thing. So as far as business protections and some things that organizations can do, a lot of the same technical and administrative defenses that we've been recommending for a long time are pretty effective. So making sure that you have a comprehensive remote access policy, that you're making users aware that just because they receive something in Discord or Slack doesn't mean that it's necessarily benign. A lot of people think that there's super comprehensive content inspection taking place, but we found that it was pretty trivial for payloads to be stored on these content delivery networks without a significant percentage of them being either taken down or detected as malicious. So something to be aware of. I mentioned this a couple times, but the use of the TLS, the compression algorithms, and a couple of the other characteristics of this abuse may make it difficult for some organizations to detect and also be able to inspect the contents of these communications, right? They all look like they're, legitimate CDN communications. They all look like they're legitimate communications with platforms like Discord and Slack. They look the exact same in a lot of cases to benign communications that you may see in logs. But the reality is there may be malicious activity taking place. So here's just a snapshot of a lot of the different security controls that organizations should really consider when trying to defend against these sort of attacks, right? There's preventative security controls that should be implemented to try to avoid this sort of attack being successful in your environment. If you don't use Discord or Slack for legitimate business purposes, consider not allowing communications with those platforms to take place on your network. Make sure that you're inspecting the contents of those communications, and if you're unable to perform network-based detection and analysis, make sure that you have comprehensive endpoint security controls deployed so that you're able to successfully disrupt the infection process, even if it does get to an endpoint. So these security controls typically build upon each other, right? That's that defense in depth security strategy that we always recommend, where you have a comprehensive set of security controls that work together to maximize the effectiveness of the security controls that you have in your environment. In the case that you cannot prevent these sorts of attacks, make sure that you have security controls in place to detect them and to be able to respond to them if they're encountered in your environment. So, shameless plug, I am a security researcher. I work for Cisco Talos. One of the things that we always try to do whenever possible is to provide as much information to the security industry about what we're seeing from a threat landscape perspective. What sort of attacks are we seeing? We try to share as much of that as possible to help raise the bar for the entire community. So there's a lot of resources that you can use to stay up to date on some of the latest threats that we're seeing, some of the analysis that we're releasing on a regular basis. So I highly encourage you to check out those resources. And with that, thanks everyone for having me. I hope this was helpful.
Oh man, that was great. I loved it. I know you can't see me, but because we have our camera turned off right now. But I'd love to spend at least a couple of weeks with you doing some of this stuff, man. That was incredible. That's awesome. And that fits right in line with what we were talking about throughout the conference today. Watching some of that stuff, and here I use Discord all through the COVID timeline. Doing all various different types of training and learning, and just clicking on those links because they say, yeah, go ahead, click on this. Here's the information that you need. And lo and behold, I probably could have, or maybe did download something, But I think back then they were still, it was a little bit before the spike that you showed in your graphic, timeline and stuff like that. But man, that's amazing. It's incredible. So we're going to open up here to questions in the audience. Do we have any online? Did you see any raise hands online or anything like that? Negative. Okay, so we got any questions? Oh, we got one up here. Go ahead, Matt. You want to come up here and?
Hey, Edmund, curious if you had seen any malware targeting Microsoft Teams platform.
So in this particular case, the majority of what we saw was actually targeting Discord. We saw malware targeting Slack as well, but there was significantly less of that. Again, this was we released our initial research in April, so I imagine that will change over time. But I think these two platforms are kind of considered, or the most commonly known as being the most popular. So those are the platforms that we've seen kind of targeted by adversaries so far.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that was interesting. That's a good question because I know we use Teams a lot. A lot of people use Teams in addition to Discord and some of the other ones. I know Discord was real popular with the cybersecurity community throughout the COVID timeframe. So, do we have other? Yes.
Can they learn anything from Microsoft Teams that would help solve this problem?
Can they learn anything from Microsoft Teams that can help solve this problem?
So I'm not super familiar with Microsoft Teams. The majority of the research that I've done on these collaboration platforms has been specific to kind of the threats that we've seen, which, again, pretty much targeted Discord and Slack.
Okay, another one.
I was going to say, I would think the bulk of that would probably be in those aspects since Slack and Discord are open and anonymous, where Microsoft Teams requires an account-based or subscription.
True. Yeah, did you catch that?
No, the sound quality is not.
Yeah, well, I didn't take the microphone up to him. So
yeah.
He was basically saying that Discord and Slack are anonymous types of platforms a lot of times, where Teams is, you're registered and you're a well-known entity on Teams, and so that can have some of that as well to affect some of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that adversaries have found attractive specifically about platforms like Discord is that, you know, anyone can register an account, anyone can stand up their own server. You know, there's no real barrier to entry there, whereas some other platforms, you know, the barrier to entry is significantly higher, and it makes it less attractive for a lot of these adversaries that are looking to generate revenue.
Yeah. So.
I thought that they had with Microsoft Teams that they'd open that up to anyone to get an account. And the other thing I do know with Microsoft Teams is that if you have the URL, you can send a webhook message to the URL endpoint without being authenticated.
Did we lose him?
No, I just stopped talking.
Oh no, I was waiting for Edmund to come back on. And
No, he's there.
he's there. Okay.
Oh yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry. Was there a question?
No, I think he was just making a statement that Microsoft Teams, you know, provides links and that you could what do you say, Webhook, and that they share out. So you know, it's another means of doing some of that stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, full disclosure, if you look at platforms that are used for cloud storage, for content delivery, you know, this isn't a problem that's restricted to Slack and Discord. This was just kind of what I was focusing on for this particular presentation in this specific research blog. But we see other platforms of use pretty commonly, you know, Google Drive, Dropbox, things like that. So anytime adversaries are able to identify legitimate platforms that are trusted by victim organizations that they can use to take advantage of an inherent trust with the contents that are delivered via those platforms, they're going to.
Yes, yeah, definitely. All right. Well, any other questions here from the audience? No. One more. Yes.
Was there a specific platform like Windows or Mac, or was the rack generic enough that it would download content based on the?
Yeah. So was there a specific platform, Windows, Linux, for the rack that was used? For
Windows.
Windows. That answer your question? Yeah. So Windows was mainly the target OS. Okay. All right. So I think Dale's going to turn on the camera briefly for you. So we have a gift for you. Just make sure you get me your address so we can send that out to you. You're going to miss out. We're going to go get some cake. So you missed pizza and some other food earlier. We wish we could have had you here live. Would love to pick your brain a whole lot more on a lot of this stuff. I might be hitting you up on the outside of this when we're done with the conference. This stuff is very, very fascinating to me. It'd be interesting. I'd love to spend, like I said, a couple weeks with you doing this stuff. So I'm sure there's probably many others here too that would be able to love to do that stuff. So again, appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
This is really enlightening. I really appreciate this. So. You can shut off your video. We're going to go ahead and take our break, and then we're going to get lined up for the next presenter after. So Matt. So what I want to do real quick. There was a question about CPEC Use, right? So again, we're going to send out an email, right, for those that need that. So if you're asking for CEUs, CPEs, check your emails that you registered with, right? That's where we're going to send those out to. So even for those that are online, if they registered online, we'll be able to send those out because we have the email address that you registered with. But now what we're going to do is I'd like to get all the speakers, obviously except for the two remote ones, up there so we can get a quick picture with the cake, and then we're going to cut it and have some cake. We'll come back up and start it. I don't know my schedule. It was 3:15, right? Is that what I had up there? Yeah.